Death wobble is a really scary word that gets thrown around way too often in the automotive industry. You know, I've heard people do it from just like a little steering wheel shimmy to to an all-out, the Jeep is or truck, and some Ford trucks had it, GM trucks, Dodges, they've all had some form of it before, where the steering wheel will rip out of your hands and the vehicle will kind of jeer across the road. We've been dealing with death wobble for decades at this point, and I can promise you this is the most technically challenging diagnostic of death wobble I have ever experienced. It may not be the absolute worst as far as aggression and violence, but it is a pretty gnarly ride when you're into it. But you're going to want to follow along as we figure out component by component all of the very good things that were installed onto this Jeep just a few months ago, as we go through the process and try and figure out what has gone wrong with it just in a very short period of time while the customer has had it. I'll give the lowdown. Jeep came in. While it was in, we noticed a number of things, why it was not safe. So ball joints and hub play and some steering issue. Long story short, customer ended up doing all new ball joints with us, hub assemblies, Moog OE style replacement steering, drag link, and tie rod assembly. We did Iron Rock off-road 2.5-inch lift kit with Fox shocks. A really nice combination. It's definitely one that we've done before with not this much excitement. And Jeep is like a 12 or a 15, I don't remember, maybe it's a 12 JK. And so where we're at right now, and that's really what matters. We're on set of tires number 4, Quattro set of tires. There is no drive shaft in this Jeep. We have taken all the suspension parts off, inspected all of the suspension parts. We've adjusted the control arms, and every single time we go over 70 miles per hour, every single time, and we hit a bridge abutment, the Jeep goes into violent, aggressive death wobble. We've had it into our alignment shop dose times. We have good caster numbers, good quality parts, good specs, and yet the axle feels like it's going to rip out from underneath the Jeep. So we just replaced the Fox shocks with a set of good used takeoff shocks that we had at the shop. We're gonna see if that makes any difference. Or we're gonna make the Savage go potty in his pants, because I'm gonna get this thing up to race speeds on the highway, and then I'm going to intentionally try and make it death wobble. Passing traffic. We're gonna get up to race speed here soon, and we're gonna see what the Jeep does. It's really hairy when it happens and I'm on this side of a semi, I'll be honest with you. That's not ideal. Yeah, that's it. And drive out of it. Semi's coming up behind us. Nope. Shocks did not make the difference. All right, so here's what I'm fussing about. I'm fussing because typically our westbound drive is not bad. Our eastbound drive is horrible. I just came back eastbound, and there was nothing. There was nothing. It didn't shake, it didn't shimmy, it didn't cause us any problems whatsoever. I don't understand that. Captain's log. It has been 14 years since we've been trying to establish death wobble in this here Jeep. Death wobble, we'll talk about what it's not. In this particular Jeep, it is not the toe-in, toe-out alignment. It is not the caster. We have adjusted it. It is not the track bar. We've changed it. It is not the tires. We're on the 4th set. What we haven't changed yet, we haven't changed brake rotors. We haven't changed hub assemblies. The ball joints are Moog, and they are arguably brand new and tight. We've inspected them, and one of them had a little bit of play, and we changed it as well. It is not the shocks, because we took our quality Fox 2.0 performance shocks out and changed them. So most recently, our team went ahead and changed out the springs. So we've removed the 2.5-inch lift springs, and we actually put factory JK front coil springs and spacers back in place. All right, here we go. Test number 1. So first bridge abutment, westbound, and we passed with flying colors. And we're cruising in at 72 miles per hour. Solid. Out of it. I had a little bit of shake, but we have no steering wheel stabilizer. It's hard to know what's your normal at speed. We're doing 74 miles per hour, and we just went across that bridge in spectacular fashion. Our test, so far this feels really good, which doesn't bode well for those springs that we took out. But I did have a test drive last week where I went all the way out and all the way back without any shakes whatsoever. We'll see what our eastbound drive, how that treats us. I think what we'll do is maybe change out the shocks and take it back out for another test drive. So what we did was we systematically eliminated pieces of the front end components one by one. We want to change small variables. So it takes a little longer, and there's definitely labor involved in it, but it helps us identify exactly where and when things change. So I think I'd like to put the Fox shocks back on and maybe the steering stabilizer and take it for a drive. Not because I think the steering stabilizer is going to make a difference, but because I want to see what that final comfort piece feels like. We're going to be talking through what we have discovered at this point. The guys brought it in the other day because things are still not right. We're actually getting death wobble. Our shocks are back on like I had wanted to do, but we are on the JK springs and the spacers still, right?
Yes.
We did that intentionally to change as few variables as possible. So what have we discovered at this point on the Jeep?
Yet again, the upper ball joint on the driver's side is loose again. We have already warrantied that out at this point, so we're going to have to do that again.
Yeah, we've done that at least once.
At least once, yep. And it was new ball joints to start with.
Yep.
So this will be the third ball joint going in there. The hub assembly, which was also replaced a couple months ago, we are seeing a possibility of a little bit of play in there. It's hard to tell with the ball joint.
Right.
The next thing was, as part of that, as we're tearing it apart to get to that ball joint, the U-joint on the axle shaft has some extra play in it, and when it was in there, you could actually lift up and see the movement between the joints.
Right.
Right now, it's not able to demonstrate easily.
And the thing is, all of our compromised components, anything we've warrantied out so far, has been in this corner of the Jeep. I would also tell you that the death wobble comes on specifically when I plant this, this driver side front into a pothole or a crack. We're going to talk through all of these parts and pieces, but this is like day 11-13 of having this Jeep in-house, and as I mentioned before, it's just a pride issue at this point. And we'll go through component by component and show what we have done, but this kind of brings us to this point where something's still not right. It's still causing the shakes and the shimmies at that very specific, over 70 miles per hour, and hitting those potholes and the imperfections in the road. And again, I would tell you it's really concentrated to that side. So what have we replaced? This is a used but good OE tie rod assembly. We actually just replaced this last time around. So as far as our process of doing a diagnostic, previously when this Jeep came in October, it had a new drag link, adjuster, and tie rod end at the pitman arm. It is on a stock pitman arm, as it should be. It got Moog drag link assembly, adjuster, and tie rod end, and a Moog full tie rod assembly, adjuster, and tie rod outer. So that was all replaced under that previous service. Previous service also included Moog upper and lower ball joints, both sides, good quality GMB hub assemblies, both sides. This is our part of our Iron Rock off-road and SFJ 4x4 lift kit. I always love to do a front quality lower control arms. This particular Jeep is rubber at both ends, and we've actually been able to adjust that caster in, caster out throughout this diagnostic process. This particular track bar is actually one that we had used in inventory, so we took off the Iron Rock off-road one, not because there was anything wrong with it by any stretch of the imagination, but because, you know, that's oftentimes what all of the, you know, people at home are like, oh, it's your track bar. Well, we wanted to wholly eliminate that, so track bar's out of the equation. We have this one on there. It made no difference. It's important to know that as we change things, we change them one at a time, and then we don't put other variables back into the equation. So that's why you're going to see a lot of the stuff has been changed, is still that way, because until we can eliminate the death wobble entirely, and then that way we'll actually go backwards. So in one of the previous drives out, I thought that the springs had maybe made a difference, so that's when we decided to put the shocks back on. I think what the difference was the soft OEJK rate and the soft rate of the Bilstein shocks that we had here in-house actually helped mask or cover up that vibration at highway speeds, at race speeds. So that's the issue. So we go back to those 2.0 Fox shocks. They're just a little stiffer shock for that, you know, off-road and lifted experience. Then, you know, yeah, it's going to shake because it stiffened up the suspension versus that very soft spring, soft shock. A lot of people say, but Neil, what about the track bar pocket itself? That waller's out on JKs. This Jeep is an 11, so it has the 3.8 motor, but the cool interior of our you know, later model JKs. Track bar pocket on this is actually pretty good. Not all at the axle side is not all wallered out, and the bolt is solid. No signs of witness mark or moving around. We torque everything. We torque mark it, so nothing's loosening off there. We also did the same here at the frame side, and the welds and inspected all that. So people who have a JL might know, you know, the early model JLs, that pocket moved around a little bit. Doesn't seem to be the case on this, and the pocket, it wasn't really an issue with JKs. It's not an issue on this one, and the pocket's not all wallered out. We have already done upper control arm axle bushings. Those would have been Moog as well. They're not delaminated. There is appropriate preload on them, and they're happy and all good and gravy. We eliminated the drive shaft because it's just not necessary for this diagnostic, and we didn't want anything, you know, to affect that potential shakes on the road. JKs don't have coil spring retainers. We actually retrofitted a TJ coil spring retaining clip onto the JK model. Our lead performance mechanic has done this a couple times. I think it's a great upgrade, simple, affordable, and it just keeps the pigtail of the spring seated in that lower portion of the bucket. But that's in there, so the springs can't be walking around and moving around. Those have been in there from the very beginning, you know, as far as with the IRO springs. So, and we've gone through, we dropped all these down, inspected all the bushings, we put them all back into place. We've had this. It's been into the alignment shop 3 times now. Also, and one of the things we thought it was zero toe ahead on the old, the Moog style tie rod assembly. So I actually was personally under the alignment rack and worked with our technician there, and we moved things around, and we realized that the toe in, toe out adjustment is relatively unchanged from when we had it into the shop in October. So we have all the documentation that builds from that initial alignment through and to now. We always do ours about a 1/16 of a toe in. I know there's some contending people, certainly with the JL crowd, the newest Jeep Wrangler platforms, that say a toe out by a 1/16 to an 1/8 is a sweet spot. We've never actually had to do that with JKs. I really don't think that's going to be our situation, our saving grace. The nature of this death wobble is such that it's highly not alignment. This Jeep feels really planted until it doesn't. We're going to keep doing it without a steering stabilizer. We're going to keep doing it with, you know, part at a time, because quite frankly, you know, until the actual physical components of parts have been corrected or changed, that death wobble is still going to be lurking under the surface. So if anybody says, you know, steering stabilizer, dual this, single that, pass through this, that's not the answer. Let's get things right, and then make our customer happy.
Several days later.
I'm not sure that we talk about doing brakes, but we brought the Jeep back in and we did the upper ball joint again. We did another hub assembly. We did pads and rotors on the front just to eliminate that in its entirety. And then I put the mad scientist, great Scott, Doc Brown, in the driver's seat, and we drove, despite the fact that he did not want to do that because he does not like the death wobble. And it definitely gave him the shakes, and the big thing we're dealing with right now is a rotational vibration. Jeffrey is in the background, and he is currently taking out the rear drive shaft and installing a known good used front drive shaft. So we had already previously removed the front drive shaft from this Jeep just to eliminate that from the equation. It actually has a little bit of play in the internal slip of the drive shaft. I went out, I found a good used drive shaft from our inventory. Jeffrey is doing a great job installing that in the front, and we're removing the rear drive shaft. Why? Because we have this rotational vibration that comes in around 45, 50 miles per hour. Now, ultimately, that rear drive shaft should not have any effect on the front shimmies and shakes of death wobble. But what I'm hoping that we can do is put the front drive shaft in, remove the rear because it's at a, the Jeep's a 2-door JK that's been lifted 2.5 inches. So those rear CV heads are just a little out of their plane of energy transfer. And that way we can eliminate improbable rear drive line. So if that underfoot vibration that comes in at 45, 50 miles per hour is still there, then I know that we need to keep working towards finding this rotational vibration. So the plan is to eliminate rotational vibration, see if running on the front drive shaft gives us any other parameter differences. You may actually see in some of the other footage that we went ahead and opened the front differential. Why? Again, we're just trying to eliminate rotational vibrations, and we thought maybe the carrier was doing something funky in there. It's not. We had done axle seals on this back in October. The funny thing is that the Jeep actually came in for death wobble on October 3rd, and we do have that timeline, and at some point in this video we'll probably go over it. But for the time being, I'm looking forward to switching out the drive shafts and getting it on the road and seeing if that makes any difference that is worth mentioning. Captain's log. It's been 14 years since we started sailing this vessel named Serenity. So this drive is going to take us back out onto the highway. The adjustments made for this particular drive. We now have the rear drive shaft back in, because obviously just driving on the front drive shaft, what that does is actually gives load or preload to the front axle. So it kind of holds it still. It gives it another place. When all those components are locked up, spinning with the drive shaft, it can mitigate death wobble. It can, and we know that. But it was interesting to see us not death wobble. Well, we gotta try. We gotta try everything. So here we are, rear drive shaft back in. We are driving in 2-wheel drive. What we did this time around, pulled the lower control arms out, and we inspected bushings once again, because ultimately what changes when you load up the front axle, that load pushes against the control arms. And we had this set at the manufacturer's recommended length. And roughly, that put the control arms at about 23 inches and a quarter. We had already played around with it and turned up our caster, ended up at roughly 23 inches and maybe 3/8. What we now did was we have access to other manufacturers' data regarding their control arm lengths, and we went ahead and we set the control arm length of these adjustable control arms to that of another manufacturer's, and we set them to 22 3/4. The parameter changes for this time out on the highway is going to be shorter control arms. So that means we will actually have reduced caster, because it's a solid axle. So we will reduce our caster number, and we will be adding the rear drive shaft and driving on that. Here we go, road dogs. Time to test this next theory, this next selection of parts in the process. All right, this is the crown moment. That semi is on fire. That semi is on fire. He's literally his truck is on fire. It's not going to end well. All right, we're going to hit race speeds. We're going to hit this bridge. This is the crown moment. We're at 71 miles per hour. Here comes the big bridge abutment. Oh, all right, its hazards are going on. We're coming to a break. Oh, that's a bad one. That was a bad one. That was a bad one. Okay. Woo! Woo! Doggy.
You're out of breath.
I'm out of breath. That was a bucking bronco there. Woo! So what I think we're going to do is we're going to put it in 4 high, and we're going to drive back eastbound, and we're going to try and hit those same abutments and see if that does anything different for us. And that will let us know. I don't know what it will let us know, but it's just going to be more data that we collect. So what I can tell you is making the reasonably finite adjustment of just changing the front control arm length to caster relativity did not do the job. So now that we have the rear drive shaft in, we're going to drive it in 4-wheel high. Now, if it death wobbles 4 high, that'll be a real adventure.
So we're going to be returning this death wobble Jeep back to stock just to see what happens, and that means we have to rate our used supply out here and see what we can find. As we're looking around, see if we can find some stock JK springs for the rear, specifically for 2-door. Alright, we got a set of rear JK coil springs. Well, that was surprisingly easy. I don't know what we're going to do for shocks yet. I don't think we have any stock shocks. You want to stay in the trailer? I'll lock you in.
This has been a process, a labor of love, and at this point in time, it's just straight up a pride issue. I'm just frustrated, and we're gonna figure this out. The Jeep came in early October for death wobble. They had a whole bunch of front end components that were wrong, corrected a lot of the sins that were under the Jeep at that time, and as well, we put a really nice, good quality Iron Rock Off-Road 2.5-inch lift kit on it. We have this whole litany of work that we have done. All the alignments, the alignment checks, all the different parameters that we have done to work over this particular Jeep. So here we are, it's still shaking, and this last round, what I have elected to do, I had our team go ahead and put it back to stock. Inevitably, we actually lowered the Jeep by comparison to what it was. This is a rare occasion, not unheard of for us, but we actually lowered the Jeep. So at this point in time, it is sitting at stock ride height on stock JK springs, control arms, track bar, sway bar links. Everything is as stock as it should have been in October when it came into us. It has still our test tires on it. That is actually the 4th set of tires that it has been on, and we are still testing it without a steering stabilizer. The reality of the situation is, yes, the engineers intended a steering stabilizer to be on the front of the Jeep. That is a comfort issue, and to ensure that in a worst case scenario, when there is a looseness in the steering, that stabilizer will provide the dampening motion to keep that steering wheel comfortable and the tires planted on the ground. So here we are, it's ready to rock and roll. We are gonna take it on a test drive. We're gonna see if it gives us the shakes and shimmies and wants to, inevitably throw us into a semi truck or off a bridge, abutment, after hitting the abutment. I don't know, something about a bridge crack. And hopefully we get some discernible information that helps us determine where we go next in our process. All right, like I said, we have effectively lowered this Jeep at this point. Right now it is stock. Some of the parts are replacement parts. Some of the parts are absolutely original with, you know, whatever 88,000 miles on it. So we are going to go on our standard test route and see if this thing tries to kill us. What do you think it's going to do, Davey?
Shake.
You think it's going to shake? I don't know what our viewers think it's going to do. That'll be the question. They should let us know. 'Cause I don't know what it's going to do. To say that I am once bitten, twice shy, that is a phenomenal understatement at this point. I don't trust any of these Jeeps with the shakes. Nope. Some of them are perfect. We never have to do anything. And then some of them just shake no matter what. We're going to find out. We're going to find out, because the only thing that's left on this that has been unmodified throughout any portion of the service is the steering gear itself. All right, we're merging. We're at 62. This is how we like it. We're surrounded by semi-trucks. It'll be okay. So this is a pretty flat stretch. Observations, feels pretty solid. It does not feel, you know, particularly flighty. However, I could tell you that before it actually felt pretty solid as well. If it doesn't shake, then we have to look at what's called rear steer, and that is the correlation of how the rear axle pushes the vehicle down the highway versus a front wheel drive vehicle. That will be, oh, there it is. And I'm going to just decrease out of the, we're not shaking as violently, but we're going. All right, I'm not braking. I'm gonna have to bring her down. Gotta get off the highway, We got traffic coming all up on us. Here it comes. Look at this line of semis. All right, we got this. This is us back onto the road. I think I feel better that it still shakes than not shaking. So it's still shaking. Oh, sugar. God. Oh my God. All right, now we're stopping again.
No, that wasn't 70.
That wasn't even 70. That was 38 miles per hour, something silly. Can we get off the highway at this point now? So as I mentioned, I think I'm happier that it does shake. At that point in time, it's the same shake. It happened in the same capacity, at the same rate of speed, on a completely stock suspension geometry. And based on it shaking, then we can say, realistically, the only things that we have not identified at this time is, in fact, the steering gear. Now, I don't really have a great scientific reason as to why the steering gear might be the issue, but it is the only thing left that we have not addressed. So we'll take this information back to our customer. We can reasonably say it has nothing to do with the geometry of the suspension. Now we just got to get it back to the shop. In our continued pursuit of trying desperately to figure out the worst case of death wobble, and now that we're bone stock, the single variable that we haven't changed was the shocks. So we did change them. We had those soft Bilsteins in the beginning. It was kind of a mixed variable. We did a number of things. So at this point in time, the goal is to, again, we lowered the Jeep as far as stock. The goal is to go fully stock, and so we need shocks. The reality is we don't do a whole lot of stock shocks, like in life, and we throw them all away. People are always like, you know, if you don't take your parts, we just throw them away. And so we have a very large scrap bin, and you know, if there's a will, there's a way. You know, I'm going to do it. So I'm about to go climb in our, 20, 30 yard scrap bin, and I'm going to dig for stock JK shocks. We'll see what we find out. That was a short trip. Don't try this at home, folks. A trained professional. Oh, shit. And there's a lot of good parts in here.
Shouldn't tell people that.
But no, there's not a lot of good parts in here. Had an eye on some stuff. Well, that's not gonna get the job done. That's no good. Also, it's okay. It's okay. I just don't want to get impaled from behind. There's got to be shocks in here. See, like, that could just be this easy, like this. That would be easy. Those are JL shocks. Nobody actually wants these. Definitely nobody wants this. Hello, hello. I want the Jeep to leave. So we're on our final drive. Not because we fixed it. Customers need their Jeep back. It's been with us for 3 months and we need to return it to them. We have checked everything. We have done front brakes. We have checked engine mounts, transmission mounts. We opened up the front axle, inspected the carrier bearings, the gears, the axle shafts, the upper axle bushings. We actually lowered the Jeep and returned it to stock. We took video underneath and we threw it out to you all on the interwebs and let you diagnose it. Nothing has seemed to fix this Jeep. So at this final drive, what we have done is we have towed out the Jeep. What we had originally installed in October was good quality Moog, tie rod and drag link. All the joints are in excellent condition. We still don't have a stabilizer on here because stabilizers are for comfort, not for fixing things. And we have towed it out roughly, I don't know, an eighth or a little less when measured by our tow alignment plates. So we're gonna drive it on the highway one last time. It is back on its 2.5-inch lift, and all the stuff, all the other parameters are perfect. And it's back on the customer's first set of tires that we originally turned it out on back in October. And we're gonna give it a go. Davey did a great job zip tying the GoPro on the front. And this time we're gonna watch, and the last time I suppose, we're gonna watch the steering gear and the track bar bracket on the frame side, or the GoPro is going to fall off. But you see the footage of that, it's not going to go anywhere. It's got a redundant safety system, right, Davey? It needs fuel yet again. I'm just going to get on the highway. If we run out of gas, it'll just make for the better story. It's a lot of traffic out today. It's going to be a heck of an adventure when we start to death wobble in all the traffic. This Ford Escape behind me has no idea what's coming their way. I really shouldn't intentionally death wobble it with how close this Escape is following us. We're gonna move over to the right lane. I got some distance between me and this Ram. Here we go, Davey. Do it for the gram. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Any moment. Oh God, it's getting worse. All right. Son of monkeys, Uncle. Oh God, it's reverberating. That had like an aftershock to it. Oh God. Oh. So now we're 66 and we can swallow up all of those. 68, 69, we're good. 72, here we go. Ah, perfect. It doesn't do anything right now. I don't like the death wobbles. I specifically had Davey put the GoPro on so that we could watch the steering gear itself, and I can see the track bar bracket here. I was actually looking for hairline issues at the track bar itself. So I'm going to run the video back. We see the drag link here is nice and tight. We don't have any issues, you know, with threads moving in or out. What we're talking about here is this steering gear moving erratically against the frame, as if the frame itself has compromised. We can see the track bar bracket here is actually pretty solid. We all know JLs. This bracket actually had weak welding on it, and so that bracket itself wiggled around. We can see the pitman arm move on the sector shaft, but it's pretty robust. But the box here moves at a little bit of a different rate than all of this other stuff. So if we kind of block that out and we just look at the box itself, we'll actually see the box kind of hop and skip and jump a little bit. One of the guys went over and he checked the bolts holding the box on, and it's tight. So it would be our argument that probably we have something going on in the frame itself at this point that has the whole box kind of moving around. And again, you know, we've seen from the drives, we can go 66, 67, 68 miles per hour, and this thing doesn't have any problems whatsoever. It is that really perfect sweet spot of 70 to 74. And so that kind of harmonic spot, and I bet we're hitting just the right tweak where the steering box itself has some play. We're forcing some play through the track bar, which comes in behind this drag link, and it rocks on the track bar pocket, and it's probably affecting the structural integrity of the frame rail itself. We've seen in a number of other 07s to 11s, we've seen this portion of the frame rail start rotting and rusting already. Kind of makes you sad, but it is possible. This is probably the worst case that we've seen, where we don't see a lot of the visible from the outside rust, but we see a lot of rust overall. And we definitely have this walking around some, so. Yep. Well, we're going to put a couple steering stabilizers on it and call it mint. We did not put dual steering stabilizers on it. We didn't put quattro.
Steering stabilizer?
Steering stabilizers.
Staring.
Staring?
You said staring.
Like men who stare at goats? Do you know that reference?
What were you guys doing in the 80s?
We did not end up putting multiple steering stabilizers on the Jeep. In fact, we actually didn't really do a whole lot more other than put one single quality Fox 2.0 standard steering dampener on it. The Jeep was towed back in where it is towed in, roughly a 16th to an 1/8. The steering stabilizer was installed and the Jeep went off to head back to its owner, with the recommendation that we put some form of steering gear sector shaft brace. Synergy does actually make a product like that. Back in the 80s through the 90s, you actually had a steering box brace that would brace from one side of the frame rail over to the steering gear and provide some form of lateral support. That is for a reason. Now, with our modern day technology with hydroformed frames, we don't typically see flexion at the steering gear itself like we once did with C-channel or some hybrid form of frame that we used to have. With that said, if the Jeep sustains some type of big heavy impact, some form of big pothole, an out of balance tire that, you know, that wore funny, that if some rust on the inside of the frame let loose and delaminated, the frame itself could become slightly compromised or weakened, which would allow that steering box and frame to kind of move a little wiggly woggly there. So there are products for that, but unfortunately we've gotten to the end of our rainbow with the services that we can provide to the Jeep. We eliminated a whole lot of standard issues. We threw the ball out to you, the viewer, and you guys offered your diagnostic input, and we checked and tried pretty much anything you could ever suggest. Obviously to no avail. That last and final footage, big thanks to our cameraman, the Savage, for configuring the GoPro to watch that frame rail and steering gear area. We could kind of confidently see in slow motion where we have kind of a wobbling movement that is the frame flexing some. And that is the most likely explanation at this point. Does the product exist that does a perfect job of tying the passenger side to the driver's side frame rails so that it gives it some rigidity? No, but there are products that will stiffen up the track bar pocket, the steering gear, and the sector shaft itself. And maybe in the future we'll have the opportunity to try that on this Jeep. In the meantime, it's a very, very specific set of parameters that creates death wobble in this particular Jeep Serenity, and hopefully the customers are well aware of that and they're just going to choose to avoid that in the future. This was a heck of a challenge, folks, and we were here for it. Our team rose to the occasion, and I'm super proud of them for that. We'll see what the future holds. Hopefully this is the hardest one that we have to deal with in a very, very, very long time, but who knows? The next death wobble job that is darn near impossible could come through the door next. Hopefully not literally.